here I am with Esther, because I really enjoyed the conversation I had with Paul, Esther. I thought it was one of the least annoying I've ever least annoying ones I've ever seen. For some reason, it didn't trigger me like it usually does. So Esther and I decided to have a conversation to see how it goes. And one topic we wanted to discuss was the whole Ravi Zacharias, and so there are certain other similar types of cases where you have this public Christian figure suddenly outed in some crazy scandal. So yeah, that's what I have to say.
Well, thanks for having me on, Julian. And yeah, I came up with that because it came up in comments under some other video. I'm not sure which, but I think, Julian, you brought up the case of Jean Vanier, who was the French pioneer of disability care, who had this wonderful reputation, and then all of a sudden it came out that he'd been seducing a bunch of young women. And you were talking about how it was hard for you to reconcile that in your mind because you'd really looked up to Vanier.
Yeah, so, I could say a bit about that if you want.
Yeah, go ahead and do that. And actually, I need to fix something with my cable, so you just talk for a few minutes while I mute myself.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the Vanier case for me was almost more of a communal thing, because I started this book club in my community where we were reading this collection of texts from Plough Publishing called Call to Community. And one of and some of the pieces we were reading were by Jean Vanier, and the people in my book club just loved his writing. I mean, he wrote in such a clear, thoughtful, profound way, and every time we read something by him, people were just blown away by his insight, the depth of his writing, and we had some wonderful conversations around it. And so we were reading stuff by Vanier, and everyone was so impressed by him. Like his writing just stood out from the rest of the stuff we read. And then when this whole Vanier situation came out, I was just, it was so disorienting for me. And Vanier, I think, is a unique case because with someone like Ravi Zacharias, what this guy is known for is just his public intellectual stuff, his apologetics. He's not really as well known for living such a Christ-like life, exemplifying this kind of humility, living with disabled people. I mean, for someone like Vanier, people were calling him, a modern day saint, and even considering him for sainthood. So that aspect of it, to have a person with that type of life just outed in the scandal was doubly difficult. And what's even more disturbing about Vanier's case in particular is that he actually had the women he abused, or the women he had these relationships with, or whatever you want to call it, he actually tried to sort of justify it theologically. And he had these weird conversations with women like, you're sort of Mary and I'm Jesus, and we're doing this mystical erotic thing, and this is helping us connect with God in some transcendent way. And yeah, it's just so disturbing to me, because it makes you wonder if that throws his whole life or his whole writing into sort of into question. And
I have a bit of a thought on the kind of the mystical side of that. So
yeah.
I don't know if I'd heard before the "oh, you're Mary and I'm Jesus" thing. That's pretty sick, especially considering that Mary is Jesus' mother. So have a little Freudianism with your mysticism.
I might have butchered a bit. It might have been a bit more sophisticated than that, but it was something like.
No, wait. Come to think of it, hang on a sec. He must have meant I know what he meant. He must have meant Mary Magdalene.
Oh,
But
maybe.
but
Yeah.
of course, that's an old heretical idea that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were having some sort of affair. So yeah, but I can remember when I only read one book of his, and I really enjoyed a lot of it. I think it was called Becoming Human or
Oh yeah, that's the most famous one.
yeah, yeah. But I did think theologically it was pretty weak, and it seemed to be pretty syncretistic. And I'm not a Catholic, but even if I were a Catholic, I think I would be sort of raising an eyebrow at the the way he mixed and matched things and was bringing in Buddhism and the Eastern traditions. And so then what it sounds like, from what you describe and from what I've read, it sounds like he was then mixing that up with his sex life, essentially. And it was just becoming this, kind of a pagan thing almost, this sort of pagan orgiastic mush.
Yeah, I wouldn't quite put it that way. I mean, I don't know if um it sounded like he was sort of saying, I don't remember what the whole, I mean, part of the Vanier case was that he actually had this mentor who was actually involved with this kind of
Oh, I read about that too. Yeah.
theology, and people were sort of saying, yeah, he must have gotten this from this mentor. I forget the name. Was it something like Philip or Felipe or something like this?
Yeah. That sounds right.
Yeah, that's the disturbing part for me. And now that you've see, this is actually you sort of began to articulate what was a difficult emotional reaction I immediately had was, okay, does this sort of throw out the whole Vanier, way of thinking about, was this throughout the whole, all of his writings? And I sort of noticed within myself a sort of desire to find like this pure theology or this pure thinker. Like, I don't know if you've recognized this in yourself, but when confronted by this, you sort of wonder, well, is this just like caused by his theological thinking, and does this taint the whole thing? And I should just find those Christians who are sort of pure. But then one thing I appreciated about your piece was that you said, this isn't really a problem that has anything to do with progressive or conservative or liberal or what have you. This is more of a universal human problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's been made clear just by the whole range of cases and different types of famous pastors and famous people who are failing. I mean, there have been scandals on the sort of fringy fundamentalist side of things, which of course leftists made hay out of. But then also there was Bill Hybels, who Paul's mentioned him a couple of times, and he ran a seeker-sensitive church. It turns out that he was misbehaving, and so it's the universal sin problem, the universal problem, particularly in this case with charismatic men in positions of power who have a group of people circling the wagons around them. Mm-hmm. That kind of corruption is just as old as time,
Yeah. I mean, would you like to get into the specifics of the Ravi Zacharias case? I mean,
sure.
I think it was.
Sure.
I'm sort of like you when it comes to Vanier, or because I never really was a super big fan of Ravi for some reason. I mean, even back when I was interested more in apologetics, I was more of a William Lane Craig type of apologist.
Ravi was well, and I also was not a huge Ravi consumer. I was just aware of him. I knew him as a fixture, like I say at the piece. I would hear him on the radio, the stations I listened to, and a lot of my friends were really into him. And so I guess some people might have been put off by his vibes. That they're elephants, like Paul says, their elephants might not have liked the whole sort of Indian charismatic vibe. They may have felt like it was a bit creepy or something like that. This kind of diction that he had, the way he has of talking, some people might have been put off by it.
There was something annoying about the way he talked. I can't quite put my finger on it, but he did name it just now.
It was this kind of British Indian mix, but rhetorically very, very talented. I mean, he knew how to tell a story. He knew how to hold an audience.
I was always a bit frustrated, and I mean, you have more of a philosophical background than me, but I was always frustrated with what sounded to me like a sort of oversimplification of ideas, or too sort of colloquial. Do you think that's fair, or?
Well, he wasn't a philosopher. He wasn't. Yeah. Right. He was never a William Lane Craig. He was never an academic. He was a popular communicator, a sort of a storyteller, fundamentally, a little more like Jordan Peterson in some ways. Except I find Peterson more compelling, actually.
Oh, yeah, way more compelling.
Yeah. But he was, or maybe Billy Graham. He was like a sort of, I think he was called like an Indian Billy Graham, that kind of thing. So he had more of a preacher sort of a vibe than an academic sort of a vibe. So for people who were really deeply into philosophy, they might not have found there was a whole lot of there. That being said, I have a really good friend who's now going into philosophy himself, who's academically quite brilliant, but he's Indian, and so as a young kid, Ravi was a big hero of his, and he would devour all of Ravi's books as a young boy. And then he actually got to meet Ravi personally. So it was this big, like a kid meeting his favorite basketball star or whatever. And he was even offered a position potentially in the ministry if he wanted to when he was about 15, 16. Ravi asked him, what do you think about coming on the road with Arzim after you've finished college and then maybe possibly joining the ministry? So my friend very, very maturely went away, thought about this, and then decided to turn it down because he said he felt like Arzim was too insular as an organization. And he just kind of had a sixth sense that he'd rather do something else and rather go into the academy proper, which is now what he's doing because he feels like he can do the most good that way. So, of course, now he looks back on that decision and thinks, oh my gosh, I dodged a bullet. That was like the wisest decision I ever made. But it's been tough for him, obviously, to work through this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not like the whole organization is tainted by Ravi Zacharias, is it? Or is there sort of an institutional cover-up scandal as part of this?
There partially. Now, I want to be very careful when I say that because I have my problems with the kind of Church Too movement generally, which is the sort of Christian version of Me Too, which I think ports over some of the tactics and principles of Me Too that I found least helpful. And these things can kind of devolve into a witch hunt that doesn't really make any distinctions, that doesn't really give grace to people who might have been genuinely misled, where it's not like, oh, come on, he must have known everything the whole time, but he just kept his mouth shut. I think things are messier and more complicated than that. And I won't name names, but I know of at least one or two people in Arzim personally who I still like to think that they're basically good guys, but it's just that they were close to Ravi, and Ravi was a very good manipulator, as it's now kind of emerging. So they would go to him and he would just kind of bamboozle them. And they trusted him so much. He'd built up so much capital and cred that they let themselves be led down the garden path. But there probably were other people in leadership who did suspect something and just kind of stuffed it down or pretended or and I do think also that I think from what I've seen, reading some documentation, reading a good letter, there was a guy named Max Baker Heitch who wrote something laying out his concerns and how when people would even so much as raise questions, they would be squelched or brushed aside. So there definitely was a sort of top-down insistence on not doing a really careful investigation, and a tendency to just kind of take Robbie's word and not follow things up. So in that sense, I think there are organizational issues, and there's going to have to be a rebranding and a shifting to some extent that has to take place.
I wonder, yeah. I mean, those types of dynamics, I think are part of what institutions and these power systems that's just sort of built into the system. But a different question I'm interested in pursuing with you is, in this specific case where you have like this conservative Christian type coming out with these types of scandals, I mean, it's hard for me to sort of wrap my head around it a bit, because I mean, how would you put this? The conservative theology when it comes to sexuality doesn't leave a whole lot of room for self-justification on these types of matters, which is a bit of a nice way of saying it, or I don't know. Do you get my question? It's like
I do. It's like, how exactly do you sort of explain it away or excuse it away to yourself? Where
exactly that.
Yeah, where with John Vanier, you could say, well, he had this whole weird syncretistic theological system where he could kind of escape to that and use that to justify. Whereas Ravi, I mean, Ravi was flat out living a double life. I mean, he would get on stage and practically brag about how he'd been so faithful to his wife for umpteen decades. And he would say that he'd follow the Billy Graham rule, which is that you're not supposed to be alone with a woman ever who's not your wife. But people knew that wasn't true. And as it happens, he was alone with quite a few massage therapists and women in spas. And that's where a lot of these accusations are now coming from. But so, yeah, he had to have been doing that. And
a related question is, okay, do you think there's anything about, this is a difficult question to answer. Do you think there's something about the conservative sexual ethic that leads to this type of behavior?
You mean like a repression? A similar question, like, like maybe the Catholic Church should rethink celibate priests, like that sort of.
Well, I mean, I don't quite want to sort of put it that dogmatically, like, oh, the obvious answer is just throw out this or throw out that. I'm just saying, do you think there's this sort of danger inherent within this sort of traditional ethic, where if it's twisted in a certain way, or if there's something missing, that it could go in a certain direction? That's more what I'm asking, rather than the sort of liberal critique of whatever.
I mean, did you have, so people have spilled a lot of ink about so-called purity culture and courtship culture, and this book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, which was very popular at a certain time and place. And it was this well-intentioned way of trying to help Christian young people to stay sexually pure, and to set good boundaries for themselves while they were preparing for marriage. But yeah, go ahead.
I would just like to throw something in from my own Hutterite context, which I think, some comments on purity culture. I mean, I think part of what's unique about purity culture is that you're trying to, in a sense, impose the sexual ethic on a culture. So I don't think it's fair to say that the Hutterites, for example, have a purity culture, despite the fact that our sexual, sort of sexual mores are sort of, very different than mainstream culture. But the difference is that these sort of sexual mores are sort of deeply rooted in the community, in the tradition, in such a way that there's like serious social stigma for sort of stepping outside of the bounds in these ways. It's sort of rooted in a traditional society type of way, where it's just it's just the way things are, rather than how I think of purity culture. It's more like you're almost imposing. This is harsh language, but you're almost imposing an ideology on people in a way that doesn't sink to the same level of being that the traditional ethic does. Does that make any sense to you? That distinction?
I think it does. I mean, what you're describing sounds a little bit like, although maybe not as extreme, but like Hasidic Jews have their own special codes, like women have to wear head coverings, and all that sort of thing. But similar to what you're describing with the Hutterites, that's a sort of organic ethic. It's built into the community, whereas what you saw with the springing up of this evangelical purity culture was a sometimes awkward, sometimes artificial, trying to force a certain set of regulations on young people that
using always, like slogans or jingles or propaganda or this type of thing.
Right? I'm more thinking about like super artificial rules and boundaries for how dating should proceed. So like the checking, like the having parents hanging around constantly was one element of that. Like super strict boundaries for when you could begin to hold hands even, or sit close to each other on the couch or whatnot. And also, I think imposed a really harsh burden on young men that almost could have a sort of paralyzing effect, where it's, well, if you have coffee with a girl, you pretty much have to marry her at that point. It's like, oh no, oh no. And so that there was, what got lost was a sort of a healthy sense of what we used to call just dating, just a dating period where you're getting to know someone, you're comparing priorities and interests, and you're interested enough to take the girl out for dinner, but you're still in that complicated in between zone where you don't know yet if this will work out and lead to marriage. So I'm afraid that in some ways the whole courtship culture, purity culture, sort of draconianly did away with that, and it left young people in a sort of awkward, paralyzed space. And then, unfortunately, a lot of those people grew up and snapped completely the other way and threw out the baby with the bathwater. And now they'll write books and op-eds like how I escaped purity culture, It really just winds up being how I overthrew the entire traditional Christian sexual ethic,
Yeah. And I remember I watched the Joshua Harris documentary on I kissed dating goodbye or something.
Yeah.
And there was one good point that a lady made where she said the evangelical purity culture sort of took on this fundamental assumption of the mainstream sexual ethic, where it was sort of like, here's this unrestrained sexual ethic is sort of the way to live your best life now, and you're just fulfilling your desire, and this is going to lead to ultimate happiness and all of this. And then the purity culture was like, I suppose in some forms, I don't know too well to know how broad spread this is, but the idea was then, oh well, if you wait until marriage, you're going to have the perfect marriage and the perfect sex life, and everything's going to be so awesome, and all you have to do is wait until marriage. So it's like these heightened expectations attached to
there might be some truth to that. There might be and a sense of kind of unspoken sense that if you're a woman and the marriage thing never works out for you, maybe you're sort of less than, or maybe you didn't do it right, or that kind of thing, which can be hurtful for for a lot of single women. And so that all can be true, but the critiques need to be made by somebody who still understands what a sexual ethic is, and it still understands what it means to live Christianly in accordance with that. And so,
yeah, I guess I think what I would like to see from Christians trying to articulate the Christian sexual ethic is taking seriously the challenges and the critiques and the tensions, and not to sort of say triumphalistically, well, this is just obviously the best way, and it just makes the most sense. And I suppose if you believe that, you can say it, but it's obvious. I mean, it seems obvious to most Christians that maintaining this sexual ethic is something that needs that is difficult and needs a lot of grace and community support in our present age.
Sure. And I mean, I think all of these questions, while they're important, I think they're sort of orthogonal to a case like Ravi's, which is, pretty classic, straight up guy getting what he wants and leveraging his charm. I was just actually talking to a friend of mine, a girlfriend, the other day, who several years ago, when Ravi's whole sexting thing first came out, but then his organization was kind of crafting this spin, she kind of had red flags growing up because she and her husband had been in a church that had a predatory pastor, and she just kind of had a sixth sense that something wasn't quite right. And so then she was telling me about some of the tactics that this pastor had used, and like the way he would flatter women, and how like he and they would talk smack about his wife behind her back, and just like how mean and awful she was, and how they never had good sex together, and that kind of thing. And this woman now who claims to have had this affair with Ravi claims that he did the same thing, that he was telling her, oh, it's so awful, my wife and I haven't had sex for like 30 years, but God has like saved you for the best. You're like the best for last that God was saving for me. So now this goes back to your question earlier. How could Ravi have been justifying this to himself if he was right? If he was outwardly parading this conservative sexual ethic? It sounds like, I mean, unless this woman is just making up those particular bits of their conversation, but if that's true, then it sounds as if Ravi was himself developing some kind of weird alternative theology where no, God wants this. I deserve this, or I need this. I'm so lonely. I'm working so hard at the ministry. I have no outlet for sexual release, but it's like God brought us together. It's just awful.
Yeah. And I think this is where it connects to the other question I had about what it is about whether this is sort of caused by the traditional ethic, because it sounds like, to put it bluntly, his penis is talking rather than his brain.
Were we saying something about elephants? Perhaps elephants and their trunks. I'm sorry, I'll show myself out. But yeah, yeah, absolutely right.
Yeah, sorry. What was
Sorry for that mental image, folks. Go on.
I was going to say something, but now I know I lost the thread. Oh, and there's a different part of me that has the complete opposite reaction, which is like, I remember the Jean Vanier case, just thinking, well, this sort of vindicates the traditional sexual ethic, and maybe just stupid, horrendous things like this get prevented if we have a more, if we have these restraints to sort of keep male sexuality in check.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And these horrible cases are sort of examples of what happens when when people don't follow those guidelines. But I guess part of the struggle there is that you can have the best ethic in the world. People are still going to experience how do you not suppress people while having this ethic? I think that's it.
Right. I don't I what you were just articulating there, like the sort of second thought you have is, well, this, if any, it just sort of vindicates the ethic. I mean, that's my thinking. This certainly, I don't think the conservative sexual ethic comes out of this looking any worse. Certainly, put it that way. I mean, it's like I was joking with Jerry Falwell Jr. Even before the most.
Oh, I heard that sentence wrong. I thought you were saying I was talking with my friend Jerry Falwell Jr.
Oh, did I say that? I
No,
didn't say that, did I?
that's how I understood the sentence you were saying. I was joking with Jerry Falwell Jr.
Oh, no. Yes, definitely not. I've never met the man, but I was cracking Paul up because I wrote this tweet saying that Jerry Falwell Jr. should try being a fundamentalist for a day and see what happens, because he's out there on a yacht with quote unquote black water and his glass and his fly unzipped, and it's just this seedy whoosh, just you know. And like a little bit of Jerry Falwell Sr. might not be out of place here. This sort of strict.
Okay, I think there's something to that, but on the other hand, so I mean, part of the problem is if you have this sort of very, if you do have this code where you're saying, you know, if you have the traditional sexual ethic that says, you know, one man, one woman, marriage, etc. How do you? I'm trying to think about how to articulate this. That that needs to be lived in such a way that you know, you're not sort of just repressing desire. Somehow the desire has to be harnessed in a positive direction rather than simply repressed. And I mean, in some of these conservative cases, wouldn't it be the case that it seems almost as if these sort of these difficult rules to follow are leading to this type of behavior, which isn't. So when I'm saying this, I'm not saying that the solution is to throw out the sexual ethic. I'm saying, you know, this is part of what Christianity has always said, right? You need some kind of a transformation in order to actually live this out. And people who are just sort of trying to just follow the rules are going to are not going to be very successful. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. What one thought I had, and again, this is more going back to just sincere, ordinary people who are trying to follow the ethic, not to people like Ravi who were living a double life. But one attitude that I think is unhelpful is a kind of an artificial insistence that love is a choice, not a feeling, and that marriage is about a commitment, even when there's no chemistry or spark there, and you're just kind of going through it as in like this dutiful sort of thing. And I've seen that kind of meme or that kind of angle get pushed really hard, and I think it can be really unhelpful, and it can lead to unhappy marriages, because even while, yes, okay, of course, infatuation comes and goes, of course, the erotic connection, the chemistry comes and goes, and spouses can become sick or disabled, and love is about staying committed to them no matter what. And yet, when you're speaking to young people at the beginning of that journey who are trying to find their life mate, somebody that they can pair bond with, and make a life with, I don't think it's necessarily a good idea to beat this drum that love doesn't require you to have feelings. Yes, it does. It actually, you know, the sex part is still a really important part, and I think that should be dealt with, it's spoken about frankly, not in a lurid way, but in a frank way, and to say, look, if you're not pair bonding, this may not work out. And you need to don't discount or poo-poo pair bonding as oh, well, that's just lustful, worldly, da da da. No,
Yeah.
it's just part of how people are. So
Yeah,
yeah,
you do need to take what human beings are seriously when.
yes, and I mean, to your question of what leads to this unhappiness sometimes, I fear that kind of talk might have led some couples to go into marriages that wound up being unhappy, which, who knows, maybe that could devolve into the man having affairs later down the road. I mean, that's a kind of a big extrapolation, but that's one thought I would have that I would offer there.
Yeah.
But so to go back to the piece I wrote about Ravi, and I was bringing in Vanier, kind of connecting the two. I was reflecting on I was reflecting on the question that you were asking, like, does this in some sense cancel the good they did? Does it cancel good things they wrote, good things they said, stories from people who were helped or personally touched by them? So I remembered this story that somebody told about a cleaning lady that Robbie was really nice to and genuinely seemed to care about, and asked her name and gave her individualized attention. And it was a kind of a by the way thing. It wasn't in front of a camera or anything. It seemed like a genuine, unforced act of kindness on his part. And so, and then of course, there's all the work that Vanier did in starting the disability ministry, and in what he personally was doing, working with the disabled, which again seemed genuine and unforced. So the question I was turning over in my mind is, is it possible? Maybe we're just such complex people. And I was thinking about Peterson saying, you're not transparent to yourself, right? That it's as if a yes and yes. Like, yes, Robbie did love the cleaning lady in that moment, and really was being kind to her just out of the best of who he was in that moment. But also, yes, Ravi was living a double life and manipulating women and lying knowingly to people about his sexual behavior and that sort of thing. And similarly, yes, Vanier really was invested in the disabled and really did love them and care about them, while also doing all this twisted stuff in private. And I think when I was younger, I wouldn't have understood that. But I think like the older I get and the more I come to understand about human nature, the more sense it makes that both those things can be true about the same guy.
Yeah, that's I think that's true. And in another sense, all of us do live these kinds of double lives, where you'll write these wonderful blog posts or essays or what have you, and just talking about these Christian ideals or something, and then when you actually examine your own personal life, you find jealousy, selfishness. Do you think, how far do you think you can take that, where you're sort of saying, well, Vanier and Ravi do have these sort of messed up things in their lives, but all of us do have the same thing, though I suppose not to the same degree. How far do you think that type of logic can go?
Well, I think repentance, or the lack thereof, is one major indication.
The stunning lack of self-awareness.
Exactly, right. It was ongoing. It was premeditated. It was repeated many times over the course of decades. And neither of them, what's so disturbing is that both of them are now dead, and they went to their graves without making any kind of deathbed confession.
Denying it.
Right. Well, right. And in Ravi's case, because that the affair with the woman was threatening to come out, then there was this official narrative and sort of carefully doctored spin that was put out, and it lasted until he died. And it was only after that more details emerged. So I think that's where the line, that's a big place where the line gets drawn is did you repent? Like, were you genuinely sorry? And I'm thinking about, there's a different guy who's a sort of evangelical comedian named John Christ. I never thought he was the world's funniest comedian necessarily, but I liked a few of his clips and things. So it turned out that he was a sort of pathetic loser on the whole sexual front as well, and would try to get women in bed with him, not always successfully, which just makes it sadder. So then he stepped back for a while, but then he came back and he made this video that was, it was just very self-centered. And it's like, thank you all so much, my fans, for believing in me and praying for me and me and whatnot. And did not seem to be really giving any thought at all to the girls that he had manipulated and harmed. And so there can be, I didn't really see fruit in that guy when he allegedly had gone away to get help and had come back, and he was saying he was sorry in a way, but it wasn't in a way that really made me trust him.
Does he still identify as a Christian at all?
Oh yeah, he's back doing his Christian comedy shtick, so it's like, oh, okay. I think also that there are different kinds of struggles, and I think people can have a tendency to put all kinds of sin on the same plane, like that no sin is worse than any other sin. So, well, okay, fine, this guy struggles with lust, but that guy over there is really fat. He struggles with gluttony. I'm like, okay, can we make some distinctions here? Or with the homosexuality issue, of course, that'll come up with, you hear this nasty rhetoric. Oh, these fat ass Southern Baptists who can't stand the gays, and they're out there stuffing their face with fried chicken and iced tea, and da da da. So, yeah, there's a real nasty streak to some of that rhetoric. So yeah, I would say repentance. yeah. We don't have to go there. But so yeah, have you repented or not? That's a big question. What kind of sin is it? That's another question. Is it a struggle, or is it something that you are indulging? And I would also say that I think some struggles can be disqualifying for leadership, even if you're actively trying to resist them. So, I wouldn't necessarily put a guy in charge of a ministry or a church or whatnot if he had an ongoing struggle with pornography addiction, let's say. And let's say he recognized it, he was remorseful, he wanted to fight it, but it's just something he was still dealing with. Then I would say, well, okay, then you need to step down. That's not something that you can be struggling with privately while trying to lead and minister other people.
Yeah, I guess that's a very communally discerned thing. Very much contingent on the community, their needs, and so on, I guess.
Yeah, and if you look at in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul has a pretty strict laundry list of qualifications. He even includes that a would-be minister shouldn't be quick to anger. So I think, oh no, well there go all the whiskey priests, the sort of the archetypal, bare knuckle brawling guys who are so great in literature, but maybe it wasn't the best idea for them to become priests.
Do you know that movie First Reformed?
I've heard of it, and I saw some reviews of it that kind of spoiled the ending, and it looked like it's sort of ended in a lame way. And
depends how you read it. The ending, I thought the ending was
well that's true. It looked like one of those artsy fartsy things that just got super weird all of a sudden, and nobody knows quite what it means.
But the weird thing about that movie is I saw a different movie I think it was sort of a Dutch movie or something from the 50s that had basically exactly the same plot, except instead of climate change, it was nuclear annihilation that was getting him all angsty.
Oh, interesting. Did it acknowledge the influence?
I don't think I've ever seen it. I wish I could find it again. It's actually on YouTube somewhere.
Oh, okay. Like one of those free public domain things.
Yeah, it's called the something night. Goodness, how would I find it again?
Well, I'm sure someone else has made the same comparison, so you could just try to Google First Reformed Dutch movies, same plot.
I could. I think one of the people on Discord first came across it. Yeah. Night something. Yeah, I don't think I'll find it right now.
But I know why you bring that up, because there's a sort of a classic tortured minister who doesn't really know what he believes. It has all this internal conflict and blah, 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 except they're at a Protestant context, a kind of liberal Protestant context.
Yeah, that type of movie is, I find it pretty, it's pretty fascinating. I suppose just those themes of those types of films or novels play with, just the pastor who doesn't actually, who struggles with doubt and this type of thing.
Mm-hmm. What I don't know, have you ever read Graham Greene, The Power of the Glory?
No, I hear it's good.
It's very good. It's very grim, but the main character is a sort of classic whiskey priest of the type that we're sort of describing here, and he's traveling around and trying to minister in Mexico during a period when the communist government was persecuting Christians. So it's like he's the last priest in Mexico, and so he's sort of on the edge of nihilism, despairing, not sure what good he's doing or what he believes anymore. So it's a bleak story in some ways, but it kind of ends on a hopeful note, sort of reaffirming the Catholic faith, reaffirming that a noble death is still possible, a noble life is still possible, and all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll have to put it on the list.
Yeah, I know. My list is ridiculously long as well.
Yeah, my list is a physical stack of books in my house, so it's even more intimidating.
Yeah, there you go. Well, so we have some time left. I know one topic that you've been wanting to get to, that you said, I have thoughts, and you capitalized thoughts in all caps in your email. So one of the most discouraging things for me is that I have found, okay, so we were agreeing that Ravi wasn't like the world's deepest apologist. He didn't necessarily have the most original thoughts, but he pulled together some nice things, and even wrote a book against Sam Harris once called The End of Reason, I think it was called. And I actually liked that book a lot. It was a pretty good response to a lot of Harris's nonsense. But then I realized the other day when I had somebody who asked me, he said that he had a friend who liked the New Atheists. So he was saying, what could I recommend to him against the New Atheists that would be a good resource? And
Kierkegaard.
I thought, shut up, Julian. Anyway, so that I was thinking to myself, oh shoot, I really liked this Ravi Zacharias book, but I feel weird now about recommending it, because now there's going to be all this baggage around Ravi's name. Mm-hmm. And so, like, one by one, as guys like this kind of fall, their resources are maybe be taken out of the pool for consideration. This could be a sort of a loose segue into questions about apologetics, the kind of small pond of apologetics, the cottage industry of apologetics. Is apologetics dead? That sort of thing. Because Ravi was sort of like the closest-ish thing we had to something like a Jordan Peterson communicator. He was different from Peterson in a lot of ways, but he kind of communicated in a similar style. He had a kind of a broad reach, a broad sweep. So now he's Yeah, go ahead.
Someone like NT Wright does that a bit too.
He's not a speaker. Like he's not a
He does
rhetoric.
get out there a lot though.
He gets out there, but he's not he doesn't have that way of like holding a crowd in the palm of his hand, you know.
No, I suppose not.
Yeah. And so, I mean, Ravi in a way was he was sort of like the last of a kind of a dying generation of communicator, maybe. Um, so now, like what we have in apologetics is we have these little sort of broken up islands, um, you know, people who each kind of have their group of fanboys, but it seems like a kind of a small pond. There are all these questions coming up about whether it's working, whether it's dead or dying or does any good. So you can go ahead if you want to jump in here and I'll say that's ridiculous or that's a really good point as the spirit leads. So
Where do you start? Gosh, here I sit on my little soapbox, not knowing what to say.
Oyez, oyez. Give heed.
I mean, in some ways, apologetics is sort of closely connected to the new atheist movement, and both of them have their sort of shared framework, shared assumptions within which they can have their little arguments. But you know, for those of us, whether you're a Christian or an atheist, who don't inhabit that frame of you know, that type of frame or those assumptions, it's just such a limited way of having arguments and trying to get at truth, I think. That's my general apologetics critique, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think, hasn't it always sort of been a bit of a niche conversation where you have these internet atheists and these internet apologists sort of wrangling it out?
It can be. It can sort of devolve into that. And also, unfortunately, very often these are the kinds of topics where it's really easy to say something nonsensical in a short and pithy way. It would take some careful analysis and argument to tease apart the strands and answer it thoughtfully. But in the debate context, there's no time for that. So if you're like Matt Dillahunty, for example, who's, you know, just a really low rent internet infidel type who really doesn't have any good arguments on his side, but he's a good sort of street fighter, and he's good at getting in his little jabs in this pithy way, and all his fans go, yeah, good about da da da, and he might be up against a Christian opponent who's actually a lot smarter and has way more knowledge than Matt does, but is kind of struggling to beat back these little jabs in a thoughtful and coherent way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think to a great extent, in retrospect, I could see problems with the debate model, the back and forth, the cross-examining, the obsession with getting things into bite-sized quantities. And with a lot of younger apologists, I see they're kind of raring to get into debates. They want to go out there and have head-to-heads. And I tell people, don't. Just avoid the debate model. It's not the best model for having out these kinds of discussions. Nobody really, well, I won't say that. I'm sure there are people who've changed their minds, maybe even changed their minds in favor of Christianity because they watched William Lane Craig and Christopher Hitchens or something like that.
He does have the testimonials on his website, so
yeah, you know, I don't want to discount that, and I have I have my own issues with Bill Craig, but I do think he's done good work at some of those debates, and he has done a good job exposing some of the the silliness and poor arguments that the atheists use. But ultimately, I think the debate model is a flawed model and always has been.
See, I think one of my bigger problems is, so we were having this conversation earlier about the Christian sexual ethic, right? And if you take an example like that, in our context, just sort of making some kind of argument for, the way apologists sometimes will, where they say, oh, well, if you're a atheist, then you have no objective ground for morality, and so you need to believe in God to have divine command theory and
don't get me started at divine command theory. I hate it. Please continue.
Yeah, that's the William Lane Craig thing.
I know it's a William Lane Craig thing, and I hate it.
Maybe it's easier to argue for or something. But if you have that approach, it's like people are getting pulled into a version of Christianity that is kind of ugly and not worth. I mean, why would anybody want to become a Christian if that's the version of, I don't know, I'm not articulating this well, but why would anybody want to become a Christian if you haven't articulated what is so attractive about the Christian vision? And what I often see apologists doing is just sort of trying to hammer people over the head with facts and say, like, here's just the truth, and just we're going to throw it at your face, and you better believe it or else. And there's just, why would anybody, I guess if you feel, if you're convinced that this is actually the truth, then you're going to become a Christian, but you're going to be a particularly stingy type of Christian who's going to miss the whole point. So you sort of see what I'm saying is that type of mode of argument is already pulling people into a mode of being Christian that's, it's missing the whole vision of following Jesus and the kingdom of God and the beauty and the transformation and what it actually means to be a Christian. I don't know.
Yeah, I think, well, there was a lot there. a lot of kind of webbing.
Yeah, there is.
Sure. Yeah. But I mean, I could pull out a few things that I think you mean to say that might be good to say. So, first of all, I do want to kind of put in a good word for even the aesthetic appeal of a well-made intellectual case for Christianity. So, I mean, I've recently completed my doctorate in mathematics, so maybe I can make a bit of an analogy here. But I didn't always have fun when I was doing my math doctorate. A lot of times I thought I'd rather be writing poetry or something, because it seemed kind of sterile. But then there would be moments where I would be like, wow, this is actually really beautiful, the way this problem comes together, the way these numbers are aligning and cohering. And so I think it's easy to dismiss the beauty of reason, the beauty of.
Okay, I mean, I'm not saying it's not. Yeah, I'm not dismissing reason or the beauty of reason. I don't think.
Yeah, and I don't mean to.
I think are you sort of saying the elegance of this well-constructed argument and this type of thing?
Yeah, that I think it can be beautiful, and I do think that God meant for us to know Him with our minds, and I think God did. I think he did leave clues for us that He wants us to fit together, in a coherent way, and that when we figure it out, I mean, it's sort of like when a little kid finishes his first 100-piece jigsaw puzzle or something, and the dad is like, "Great job! That's exactly what I was hoping you would do," And so I think that I don't want to discount that. At the same time, I think what you might be getting at is that there can be an incompleteness if you focus exclusively on the case making side, the argument making side, like you're the here are the various intellectual or academic reasons why it's correct to believe that Christianity is true. That if you rely solely on that and you don't supplement it with literature, with art, with music, these different kinds of things that speak to other elements of what we are, that explain why the Christian life is beautiful, then it's incomplete. And I think maybe when you see, like when you saw Peterson and William Lane Craig on the same stage together, Craig was more, he had his philosophical ducks in a row better than Peterson did. So in that sense, you could tell that his training was better, his analysis was better. But Peterson was the more compelling figure on the stage, because he was speaking to people's hearts, and kind of tugging at the heartstrings when he talked about suffering and pain and all that sort of thing. And you could tell that Craig wasn't exactly sure how to respond to that, or how to like speak into the same space that Peterson was speaking into. Where I think somebody who was a little more in tune with those other things I was mentioning before might have been better able to kind of pivot, and set up a more complete vision of Christianity to match what Peterson was bringing there. So that was, for my own part, kind of rambling, but maybe you could see how I'm trying to tease out what you might be saying there.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I mean, man doesn't live by pure propositions alone. I mean, you could be brought to the point where it's like, okay, fine, I do think this is true. That is important. It's important to be left without any intellectual excuses to kind of hide behind, or throw up a smokescreen for what's probably the real reason why you don't want to become a Christian, But then at that point, you still have to want it to be true. And you still have to want to serve God. You still have to want to love God. And Christianity, as you were saying, it has to be presented as the most beautiful option, the most attractive option in more ways than one.
Yeah, well, trying to think of what to add to this. Well, I don't know if you saw this little debacle I recently had with the internet atheists around here.
On Paul's channel, or
the Nathan Ormond channel.
Oh dear. Yeah. I haven't finished Paul's convo with him. It looks like they had a good chat, so that's good. But yeah,
I had one with him too, and I think it was a bit of a disaster, but
okay.
That's fine.
Did you bring out Kierkegaard?
Sort of. It was
that is Kierkegaard's
he was asking me
fault.
all of these he was asking me all of these sort of trick apologist questions, like did God drown the world in a flood, or did God tell Abraham to kill his son, and what does this tell us about the character of God? And I don't know, I think I flubbed the questions a bit, and yeah,
they're gotcha questions.
Yeah, it was frustrating because what I was trying to tell him with, for example, the question of, God flooding the earth or something, that's not a very good example, but a lot of the questions these guys were asking were sort of rephrased theological questions, like the problem of evil, or what to do with Old Testament violence. And what frustrates me is that these questions are being put forward as a sort of knockdown proof of Christianity, right? If you we're going to rephrase the problem of evil and just throw it at Christians, and I'd be like, you must never have encountered this before. Like, here's a completely unique objection. And yet, I mean, theologians have been struggling with the problem of evil for,
centuries.
I mean, you go read the book of Job or something. Maybe you won't find the answer you're looking for, but you'll find people struggling with it at least.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. I have no patience for that kind of thing.
Yeah. And then there was this one, so there was this live video chat between atheists and apologists that I thought just perfectly encapsulated what's wrong with apologetics.
Who all were
The
some of the
atheists were
people?
asking the Christians, so if God took
Were they like people I
a
would
bunch of
know, like names people, or just ordinary?
Pine Creek, do you know Pine Creek?
Oh,
He's
don't get me started on him. I know of him. Yes.
I
Yeah.
think I know why. Yeah.
I blame him.
Yeah.
I kind of blame him for Nathan, but I mean that's a whole other story.
Yeah, we can talk about that later, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's just kind of what's it called? What are those people called? Street epistemology type.
Yeah, I think he is kind of into that. I was just going to say he's a hack, but that's
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I got the sense what the game is there is to ask a loaded trick question and then to trick Christians into, or whoever their opponent is, into sort of these linguistic games where you're not really talking about truth. You're talking about what propositions can be defended or it's a linguistic game was my sense.
Yeah, I've followed the street epistemology movement for a while. That's exactly what it is. It's a way to catch unprepared Christians off guard and then kind of just kind of bamboozle them with this kind of sleight of hand. It's really disingenuous.
I mean, like they were asking questions like it was sort of asking like posing the problem of evil as a question and then demanding a yes or no answer. And then when I refused to give a yes or no answer, they were saying I'm dodging the question or I'm being.
That's a favorite too. Yeah. Anything. if you say, well, that's complicated, or well, I don't. Oh, so look, he dodged the question. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the debate these guys were having was the atheists were asking the Christians, so if God told you to kill your mother, like in a sort of a vision or like a voice in your head, would you do it? And these Christians were just flobbing at the answer. They were like, oh, I'd have to have this conversation with God and we'd have to wrangle it out over hours of prayer and conversation. And
the optics of that are pretty bad. Yeah.
No, I mean, the answer is just a Christian is someone who doesn't believe in a God in the abstract. He believes in the God revealed in Jesus of Nazareth. And so nobody can kill his mother for any reason. It's the right answer.
Well, and I mean, if I'm being honest, I mean, we're all being honest here. I have kind of wrestled with the Abraham and Isaac story. It is a disturbing story in certain ways. And my own resolution for that is that Abraham didn't actually believe that he was going to be killing Isaac, because he believed the prophecy that his seed was going to continue specifically through Isaac. So he must have been trusting God the whole time, that this was some kind of a temporary test, but he wasn't actually being asked to put his son to death in the normal sense of killing somebody. So
you should read Fear and Trembling.
Oh, I know Kierkegaard goes on with that. But then when I come to some of these other Old Testament passages, the Midianites, the Canaanites, Amalekites, whatnot, where the text is saying that God was giving these explicit orders to kill baby boys. I mean, there's really not much wiggle room there. It's just like, you go take your sword, slit that baby's throat over there. Good job. You slit the baby's throat. Moving on. Now, I have to actually kind of bite my own sort of bullet there and say that I think something's wrong with those passages. In the sense that I don't think I think they're errant. That's one big place where I have to confess that I'm not an inerrantist when I'm in certain conservative circles, and that could be uncomfortable. But I'm willing to acknowledge that those passages do present a conundrum for Christians. So when atheists raise them, I don't dodge that question. I don't sort of shirk it. And I don't mean to make fun of Christians who fumble and bumble and struggle to answer those questions, or Christians who kind of come down on who try to reconcile it with some form of inerrancy. But I just found for myself, I can't actually do that. So it's not a wholly illegitimate question, but you're absolutely right that those sorts of things can certainly be framed and thrown at people in a gotcha fashion that shows that the atheist isn't actually interested in having a thoughtful conversation about it.
Yeah, that's my, I mean, that's the frustration I have is this isn't going to be much of a conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're just, I don't know. Well, I mean, part of the Abraham story is that it's
foreshadowing.
I mean,
Christ.
Answering. Well, I mean, the revelation, the fullest revelation of God comes in Christ, so that you do have to do some explaining with the Abraham story. But the easy answer to the above question is still no. I wouldn't kill my mother because I'm a Christian. I think. I mean, right? I mean, there's just no way to be a follower of Christ and to decide a voice in your head told you to kill your mother.
Sure,
that's a sin. That's just wrong.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you could phrase it that way, but that they are going to come at you with, well, okay, but it's, but what do you then do with these passages where God is outright telling people to kill baby Midianites? Come on, answer it. So I think you do need to say more. Like, I think you need to go on and say, like, for example, you could say there are other passages where the Old Testament God.
Yeah, that's just a separate question.
Well, but I think it is relevant because I think you need to have it worked out. I think you need to have a kind of a worked out theology of what God, by definition, could or couldn't command you to do. And I also think that it's more than just Jesus. I think it's both Old and New Testaments. So, for instance, in the Old Testament, you'll have passages where it says that God hates hands that shed innocent blood. It's similar kinds of very strong pronouncements where, like, human sacrifice is repulsive to him and that sort of thing. So you can say, I believe that the Christian God, as manifested both in the Old Testament and in Jesus' incarnation, is not a God who would ask me to kill my mother. So, that's
my point, right?
Exactly, right.
And even if you take the Abraham story, I mean, what's happening here again is we're framing the issue in a certain way. We're putting a certain interpretive spin on the story, and we're saying, well, here's the objective way of reading this text, and Christian, do you agree with this or do you not? And if you disagree, then that means you're some liberal Christian who we can just put away in this little box. And if you agree with us, that means you're a fundamentalist Christian who's just evil and we can dismiss you as well.
Right.
So
right.
If you look at the Abraham story, what you need to say is what's happening in that story is not God is putting Abraham through some arbitrary test. It's actually God revealing to Abraham that human sacrifice is not okay. I mean, this is a fundamental turning point in God's self-revelation where human sacrifice is.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Yeah.
It's a completely different spin on the story, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, I mean, the fact that God actually did tell Abraham to stop is it's a kind of sort of important part of that story, to put it mildly. And
yeah.
Now,
this is what frustrates me about these conversations.
Yeah.
We are, what's happening is the Christian and the atheist are, the Christian is being forced into a mode of argumentation that isn't really Christian. He's being asked to give sort of non-theological answers to questions that are theological. And that's why the apologists usually are pretty bad at theology too. And they end up giving these weird, abstract, objective God who isn't revealed in Jesus type of answers to questions that are much better resolved by theological reflection.
That is an interesting question. Is bad theology part of what's wrong with apologetics? I do think you're right, and I think it's absolutely right to bring in the character of Jesus, the character of God. Although I do think it's important not to go, not to sort of drift in a Marcionite direction, a la Andy Stanley, where you just sort of go, well, that's the Old Testament. God was just kind of mean in the Old Testament, but that's okay. Now we have the New Testament and Jesus. It's
well,
don't want to go that direction.
I'm not really. I'm not so much trying to do that. I'm just saying.
No, I'm not accusing you of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying in the specific case of killing your mother, there's a Christian answer, and you don't have to sort of pretend we're still in the part of the story where God is telling Abraham to sacrifice his son. We're in the part of the story where Christ in his not-violent way has been revealed.
I do think, I do think that one wants to give some thought to, though, and does want to be prepared to say, for example, let's think about Islam for a minute. And let's think about terrorists claiming that that they're being guided by Allah to blow themselves up and kill innocent people. Okay, so we say, well, obviously God is not actually telling these guys to blow themselves up and kill innocent people. It's like, okay, well, how do you know? Did they just get the wrong God? I mean, God seems to have told people to kill innocent people in the Old Testament. So is it just that they misheard or something like that? Like, is telling people to kill the innocent still hypothetically a thing that the Christian God could do? And so it was kind of thinking about that and how I would answer that kind of leads me to conclude that there's something wrong with those passages in Scripture. But I worry that a lot of Christians haven't thought about that. And so I do think you need to be prepared for that kind of a question.
Yeah, well, I mean, to put it in from a bit of a different angle, for someone like me who's an Anabaptist pacifist, thinking about the violence of God is a much more difficult question, because if you want to say that the character of God is revealed in Christ and Christians are called to this non-violent way, how then do you think about what happens in the Old Testament, or even might be even some examples like the Ananias and Sapphira story.
Are you a full pacifist then?
What do you? Yeah.
Oh, then your job.
So that's why the question is.
You're making things for me. Yeah, you're making things really hard for yourself. In that case, you got it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why the question is the question of Old Testament violence is a bit more difficult for me. And I'm sympathetic to someone like Greg Boyd here, I guess, where he sort of says God is accommodating himself to where people are at, which doesn't quite get us off the hook, but it.
I don't think it works. Yeah, and he and Paul Copan have gone back and forth, and I haven't listened in depth, but my impression is that I think I would agree with Copan's responses to Boyd's particular arguments. But I also don't like Copan's own work on this stuff. I don't think he actually helps at all or solves anything. At that, okay, now I'll throw in get on my own little soapbox. One of my own little gripes or peeves about the apologetic world is that there's this bad habit for, pick your favorite question that comes up over and over, your favorite Christian atheist topic or issue. A lot of times, Christians in apologetics forums or whatnot, when the question comes up, they'll have their go-to guy or their go-to book, singular. They'll just point to and go, oh, so-and-so's book just answers that. There we go, done. Just go read this book and it'll be magic and all the questions will go away. And so then, like half the time, I'll go read the book and go, well, that kind of sucked. That didn't actually help. I think we need to keep looking. But people don't really know where else to look because they have their little toolkit, their little list, and then they wind up kind of deferring instead of stopping and really thinking deeply and critically themselves about these questions, and possibly, scary as it is, coming to a different conclusion from their favorite apologist.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. Trying to think of, I don't know. I'm not sympathetic. I just don't like the approach apologetics takes at all. I think the answer to atheist objections is better theology, not better apologetics.
Don't you think that could be a false dichotomy, though?
Well, I suppose a good theology could have apologetic purposes, but it just seems like a weird thing to do, to pretend you don't believe in Jesus for the sake of arguing with atheists.
Well, I would disagree that that's what one is doing. I think that's a straw man of what.
Well, my "would you kill your mother" example, I think, illustrates that.
You made that in your view the Christians were pretending not to be Christian in order to try to answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, it's the type of question that would be difficult only if you're like an insular man on an island who's never heard anything about God and suddenly hears this voice in his head that says, you should kill your mother.
But I could see how for a certain type of even like a really sincere conservative Christian, I mean, imagine a like straight down the line inerrantist conservative Christian who really does believe that there was a point in time when God told people to kill babies. I mean, that is going to be a question that disturbs him. That is going to be a question he struggles to answer, I think,
I find that weird. I mean, isn't like a fundamental Christian principle of spiritual discernment, if God is telling you to do something that is wrong, then that doesn't come from God? I mean, that's just
well, I agree with you. I don't have an issue with this, but I think that's partly because I'm not an inerrantist, and that's partly because I have a really strong sense of like the natural light, or what we, like you just said, your sense of what's wrong. So I would say your moral compass, your moral intuition, which I think God gave us. But some people will struggle with that. Like some people who are more insistent on a sort of distorted sola scriptura.
But if they were real sola scriptura people, they would see that the Bible says, "Thou shalt not kill."
Well, it's true. That is true. But then I think they have a problem if they insist on inerrancy, because then you have an internal tension or a contradiction, I think, right there in the text.
Well, I mean, the problem isn't sola scriptura here. The problem is you're putting your private revelation over the text. I mean, right?
So you mean the private revelation that it's wrong to kill babies? I mean, what?
The private revelation that God is telling you to kill your mother.
Oh, the opposite, right? Oh, yes, I've had a word from the Lord. Well, yeah, that's true, and I do agree with you there. And people will say, well, the canon is closed. I mean, that's a typical thing. We're no longer in an age where God speaks directly.
I mean, I thought that was just very standard conservative sort of spiritual discernment. Is if God is telling you to do something that is contradicted by the Bible, then that just means you shouldn't do it.
Sure. And so, but I mean, my point with this particular question is that in one sense, it's contradicted by the Bible, by the command not to kill, the statements of God that He hates shedding innocent blood, by the character of Christ. But on the other hand, you could find these specific places where it seems like God was giving permission for that sort of thing. So then I think what's needed there is a deeper reflection and development underneath that of a really firm. Well, sure. I'm fine with saying theology, but combined with maybe you could say natural theology or good philosophy, or to bring a little bit of Kantian terminology in here, deontological ethics, a strong sense of what's intrinsically wrong, a strong sense of
I guess if people are struggling with whether or not to kill their mother, they need a good ethics class or something.
Well, and I mean, like there's like whole big debates, of course, are fought back and forth in ethics journals and freshman classrooms about like, okay, if you could go back in time and kill baby Hitler, knowing that he was going to become Hitler, would it be wrong to kill baby Hitler? And so you need, and I unfortunately, I think that not all Christians necessarily are really solid on this question, but you need to get really solid on the fact that it would be wrong to kill baby Hitler. Okay, because it's intrinsically wrong, always, everywhere, every time, every place, to kill innocent people.
Gee, that's a weird thing for non-pacifists to say.
I don't think it's weird, because I think there's a. I mean,
if you know what Hitler is going to do, it seems like a logical thing to do, to just snuff it out before it happens.
Oh my gosh, this is so much fun, and we're like coming to the end of this. Okay, so
look at me. The pacifist is arguing with the non-pacifist.
No, this is great. No, this is okay. Well, so this is so much fun. I just have to I just have to stop here and explain why I don't think that's true. So, I think that to take that view that you're describing there, kind of playing devil's advocate, I mean, that would be straightforward consequentialist ethics, right?
But I don't know if I don't know if I like the whole Kantian, what's his view, deontological, is that what it's called? Where it's just like these absolute moral principles. I think that that's just not quite how it works, because of the complexity of situations, and I don't know. We could get into this more, I guess.
But I mean, so the reason why you could, you the way you put it was, wouldn't it be logical to snuff out baby Hitler before he did all of the horrible things? And I would say, well, yes, you could construct a certain logical system whereby it was the indicated choice. Like if a computer were running we're running risk management calculations or whatnot, and then brought you its mechanical opinion to terminate baby Hitler. Like this is what will prevent loss of life. Do you wish to proceed? And you go, okay, yes, I will. There we go. Target eliminated. Moving on. And so, but that's
is part of the question here whether you have absolute knowledge about who Hitler will turn out to be?
No, that is actually importantly, and it's so funny because I was just having this conversation with a really good friend of mine the other day, who's a Christian apologist, who told me he wasn't sure whether it would be wrong to kill baby Hitler or not. And I went away a little bit distressed for that conversation, like, oh no, how do I convince him? This is bad. I didn't know this. But no, I don't think that it's a matter of intel or the perfection or completeness of your foreknowledge. I think that
two things I wanted to say before you answer the question again.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I think part of the question here is the nature of time, where
Well, this is a matter of the nature of time. Now I heard that in Peterson's voice. It depends on your view of time.
I mean, okay, if you're traveling back in time, which is part of the question.
Well, okay, time travel is first of all, time travel is in fact logically and physically, well, is it logically impossible?
Well, it's part of the question.
Well,
so
it's at least physically impossible. So, I mean, this whole thing is in fact a kind of a silly hypothetical.
Yeah, like all of the ethics situations are.
Yeah, the trolley
Gosh,
problems.
that stuff gets stupid. Like the epistemology conundrum about the barns and the barns in the field and whether some are fake and some are real.
Oh yeah, that's a chestnut. Yeah.
This gets into the nature of time, because if you're coming back if you're going back in time with the time machine and you come across baby Hitler, you already know how the story ends. You know for a fact that he's going to be an evil person.
Going to be is the key phrase there, though, for my purposes.
But the going to be is a question of the nature of time. I mean, you're sort of saying it's okay to kill him at point A rather than point B, which is interesting. I suppose at point A he's still innocent, and at point B he isn't. But that assumes a certain view of time, doesn't it? Because if time doesn't work in this sort of point A to point B way, then it's okay to kill him at point A as well.
Well, I mean, think about it this way. I mean, the reason this is presented as a conundrum is or a tension is because there's an assumption that baby Hitler is innocent in some important sense, right? Because otherwise, if it were like, well, he actually is guilty.
He is. I mean, part of the problem is you're God in the scenario, literally, because how it's.
But the way it's, but the way it's presented, I mean, the reason why it's supposed to be a tough problem or a knotty question is that you're killing an innocent baby. But the question is, but is it better that an innocent baby should die in order to prevent future suffering? That you go off and you have the freshman ethics debate. So, I mean, I don't think that most people would take the view that the baby is guilty. Actually, like I don't think that's the idea there. I think people, if they argued in favor of killing the baby, they would argue for it in a utilitarian way or a consequential.
Well, I think you're glossing over some metaphysical questions here.
Oh, am I?
Where you're forgetting about the time machine. I mean, you're going from point B to point A, and you already know where point A is going to end up, and you know for a fact that Hitler, the baby, is going to become Hitler, the evil man.
Okay, but at this
in a
point,
sense, he has already.
Are we saying going to become or has already become? Because it seems like what you're saying is.
Well, it's a rotten tree, so to speak. You know where the tree is going to grow to.
Well, right. But I mean, what you're getting at is the whole reason why time travel is impossible in the first place, because we can't actually have these kinds of loops where it's like both has already become and is going to become. Like, you can't actually, in fact, have both of those things contained in the same person.
But in a mysterious way, the creature you're looking at is fully formed Hitler in actuality.
I mean, it's a little bit hard for me to counter that, since this whole thing is nonsensical. So it's how do you argue inside a frame of nonsense when this whole thing is impossible? I think I would just go back to saying that I think for the purpose of the scenario, at least the way that's typically presented, you're supposed to consider the problem and answer the problem under the assumption that there's some fundamental sense in which the baby actually is innocent, and that this is why it's a conundrum.
Yeah. It's kind of an impossible dilemma, because they're putting forward a human being that both is already something and is not something already at the same time. And there's no human being who is both of those things at the same time. You can't be Hitler and be innocent at the same time.
Yeah.
To be a human is to be Hitler or to be innocent. Yeah, look at me waxing existentialism.
Well, and here's my feeble attempt to bring together the various strands of what we were running all over today, because we were just before we were talking about this question of the divided man, which I was getting at in my piece about people who live a double life, where it's like they seem saintly and evil all at the same time.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a good point.
Yay me! I made the connection. I brought it together. So do you have any final thoughts? We're coming up at 2 hours here. That seems like a...
Sheesh. Yeah, this was fun.
This was fun. I'm glad you invited me.
Yeah, we can do it again at some point, I guess. But yeah, I don't have any final thoughts. But yeah, this last example you just brought up, it gets me thinking. That's a good point.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm nerdy, and so I think about this stuff constantly. So it's yeah. Go ahead.
Kierkegaard made the point in something I read recently, Works of Love, that by basically every act and every judgment you make, you are sort of judging yourself in a fascinating way.
That's very Petersonian.
Yeah. He says sort of the last judgment happens at each moment, at each active decision.
Ooh, I like that. That's kind of cool. Some of T.S. Eliot's poetry gets at that as well. Like I forget if it's in Little Gidding or one of the other 4 quartets, where he says any action is a step to the block, to the fire, or down the sea's throat, or to an unmarked tomb or something like that. And that is where we start. In my end is my beginning. In my beginning is my end. This is a very famous Eliot-like loop. But it's this idea of, in a sense, I mean, you could get into, oh my gosh, now I'm about to open up a whole theological thing and then go, bye, food for thought, everyone. But I mean, it kind of gets into the whole question of like progressive salvation versus point in time salvation. Is there some sense in which we are ongoingly saved? But does that get too uncomfortably close to work salvation? Are we getting all papish here? Or, lots and lots of food for thought there.
But the works grace distinction is obviously a false dichotomy. So, yeah.
I would agree there. Yep.
Look at how enlightened post, what's the word, Reformation we are now.
Yes.
Just transcended the debates.
Exactly. Yeah. Everyone should follow. Well, not yours, but mine. My in my particular quarter of Protestantism is the true, pure, perfect theology. Like you were saying earlier, you found it, the perfect rarefied theology.
I wouldn't necessarily advertise my own particular tradition, but me personally, follow me. I'm right.
Yeah. Well, you are Arminian at least, right?
Arminian. Arminian. Yeah, something like that. I haven't thought about this stuff too much. I think it's probably also a false dichotomy.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so Paul and I don't believe in infant baptism. So some people say, oh, good. Hey, there we go. We're united at that. But like some people, so Paul says that Tripp and I are the same person. And then I'm like, we can't be the same person. Tripp believes in infant baptism.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And he's a Thomist.
Yeah, he's got his own, and I'm not an AT Aristotle Thomist.
Oh, is he into Feezer as well, or?
Yeah, I think so.
Do you, you ever
some.
argue about intelligent design?
I think we have a sort of an equitable disagreement there. I mean, I think he's sympathetic to design. It's not something that he studied super deeply, but I think Tripp is more comfortable with a sort of Feezerian way of thinking about it. But he's not obnoxious about it in the way that some theistic evolutionist types can be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. We should wrap it up, but
yeah, we should wrap it up. This has been fun, Julian. Thanks so much.
It has been. Yeah. Yeah. Later.